Hello, and welcome to another episode of Naburva Talks. Today we're going to be talking about the subject of strategy. Strategy is a concept that is a little bit confusing or elusive, especially when we are dealing with rapidly changing or unprecedented environments. So the guest joining us today, who will be sharing their thoughts with us, is Adam Kolozetti. Adam is the co-founder of Enta Solutions, which is an Alberta-based consulting company. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, all right. So first of all, if you could please share with us a little bit about the history or the story behind the creation of Enta Solutions.
Okay. I think it's a good story.
I'm sure it is. Yeah.
So I'm an aerospace engineer by trade, and my business partner, Caitlin, is a materials engineer. And we both worked for big companies, and we met working at a big engineering company. And, we just kind of started hanging out and we'd have conversations. We'd call them philosophical discussions. So I was having a rough day. I'd message Caitlin or she'd message me like, hey, you want to just have a philosophical chat? And we just chat about like things that frustrated us or ideas that we had, and where we said, you know what, if it was our company, this is how we would do it, right? We do this or that or the other thing. And then one day we were like, you know what? We should just take these discussions and like put them online and create like a online forum, right? And then Caitlin's like, let's create a company. So we did. We marched down to the registry's office and created the company. And yeah, that was in 2015. So here we are 6 years later. The whole inception about what Enta kind of evolved from or grew from there. So Enta is Arabic for you are. So you are the solution. And what happened was Caitlin and I were working on a project, and it was a pipeline project, and a difficult client, lots of changes, just like chaotic, big mega project. And if something could go wrong, it was going wrong, right? Finally got it done, IFC drawings, all finished, all celebrating. And then we get a phone call the next week, and we get called in the project manager's office. He's freaking out because construction started, but in the wrong place. They cleared a section of trees in the wrong area. And as you can imagine, high profile, just a public relations nightmare. What happened? So Caitlin was in charge of doing the investigation, and it turned out that all that happened was in the mad rush to get things out. Lots of times you'll just email it instead of like sending it to your document control team. And they missed revising the drawings. Instead of changing it to revision 3, it stayed as revision 2, got sent to the construction contractor. Construction contractor looked at it, said, I already have revision 2. So ignored it, and the change was never captured. So one tiny little, all the hard stuff was done, just one tiny little step. And, Caitlin and I looked at each other and we were like, you know what? Yes, there are always pressures, right? But you understand the risks involved in these process steps. And that's what happened. There's a disconnect between the people executing them and the process steps and understanding them. So they basically accepted a risk without understanding it, and then it manifested and blew up. So like, there's got to be a way to create ways of doing business that connect with people, that actually, so they understand what's happening and they can make informed decisions. Because maybe sometimes it makes sense to skip a step, but be aware of why that's there, and you will behave a little differently. So, that's kind of our inception of Enta Solutions. And then we actually got our very first contract with an oil and gas company. And the first thing they did was invite us to kind of consult on like a procedure or a standard that they were developing. And, we were pretty new, a small company. We were like riding the elevator up, and, it's like game face on, the door's open. And there's other consultants that they've hired as well. Like these are consultants that have their own buildings, right? Not boutique, small
Right.
little businesses.
Right.
And so, we were pretty overwhelmed, but we sat at the table, and then after the guy that hired us handed us a standard, it was 16 pages, and he said, another consultant prepared this. I want you to read it. Give me your opinion. Okay. So I read through it, and it was like perfection. It was like very well written, detailed, maybe some preference things about how it may organize, but like nothing really to say it was accurate. But in getting to know our client and like their values, one of their values is like entrepreneurship, which means they like to be dynamic and flexible. And kind of looked at each other like it's right, but it like doesn't feel right. Like it feels like in this environment with these people, if you gave them this 16-page document that's like written kind of in legalese, no one would read it. It wouldn't change any behaviors. It like wouldn't do what you're trying to do. So
Right.
like that was the decision. We're like, is that what we're gonna say? Our first big job, like that's what we're gonna say to a client? Like it's right, but it doesn't really feel right. Like, hey, stick to your guns. So yeah, we said, okay, this is technically correct. It's very well done, very well like references all the right things, but we just don't think it suits your guys' culture the way it's written, and we don't think it will drive behaviors, and people won't read it. And there was like silence, and he's like, "Thank you. That's what it is. I've been reading this and racking my head around it, and I couldn't figure out what was bugging me." And he's like, "You just nailed it." And he was so excited. And then we turned around and rewrote a different one for him that was 2 pages in like 3 days. And they've been working on that for like 3 months. So the point of the whole story is that kind of just confirmed for us this kind of like epiphany that like there is a way to connect your people and your culture to the technical business process side of it. And we kind of got away from that connection, and there's this like kind of gap. So that's how Enta Solutions was born. That's the
That
story.
that's absolutely right, and this is a very interesting story. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's just a just one particular incident that kind of triggers that hidden kind of concern, or that curiosity in you, which makes you think that there are probably other ways in which you can provide way better value to a client or to your own organization. So yeah, that's a very interesting story, and I think that is, I mean, Enta probably would not have been able to understand the right value if it would not have been for similar instances, right? So
Hmm.
probably you saw the disconnect between the culture and the processes and people and the communication, and that's what kind of kindled your inner interest into how you can create value. So that's really interesting. So that's about the value that Enta provides. So if you could share with us a little bit about how you guys carved out the strategy, because Enta was born out of the like as a product of these opportunities that you saw that you could
Hmm.
create value. So how did you carve out the strategy for your organization?
Well, strategy, becomes a more powerful word as we matured. In the beginning, you're just trying stuff, right? You're pretty fresh. Then you kind of get some momentum and learn some stuff. And then, strategy for us was kind of like looking to the future. What do we think the future is going to be like, right? Your tactics, your operations, how are you going to execute in the next year or so, or what are you going to do, and these things you want to accomplish, right? But the actual strategy is kind of like how are you going to hedge your bet so you're perfectly aligned for a probable future that you think is going to happen, right? This idea of like futurism. And that the funny thing about strategy is like no one could have predicted the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, other than if you were someone that studied this stuff, and you know, no business had that in their strategy plan, like so for us, yeah, we had like an idea and a strategy about like what we were doing and the clients we were going to go to. Like, for example, And in the beginning, we're engineers. We thought, oh, we should try, and maybe that's our niche, is working for engineering firms. Let's try that. And then, the pandemic hit, and then like all strategy, all planning out the window, right?
Right.
It's not worth the paper it's written on anymore.
Right.
So this idea of like panic and then pivot,
Right.
right? So sometimes strategy is like this long-term game where you have a vision and you're kind of like maneuvering or positioning yourself, and then sometimes it's like very rapid kind of pivot. So for us, for example, um, as many consultants had the same experience, most of the business lost when the pandemic hit. So what do? We pivot, we learn digital media, we learn social media, we
Mhm.
hit that stuff hard, right? It
Right.
was never part of our strategy up until that point. And then it became the integral part of our strategy. It totally morphed or evolved the way we approach business. And now, when we do a strategy session, that's one of the things. So for us, we piece together a strategy program that we call our whole business strategy. And for us, a big part of it is this idea of looking to the future. What are the big external influences? And we said, okay, well, we think this idea of digitization is going to increase. That's not going to stop. And then we think the economic recovery, we said it's going to be this like idea of K-shape. Like some things are going to go up, some things are going to go down. The whole thing's not just going to like, rise.
Right.
So how can we position ourselves? And then all of a sudden, digital media became an offering that we offer. Um, we changed our um, ideal clients from engineers. Turns out engineers are impossible to sell to because they
Mhm.
already know everything. So then it turned out using social media, we saw who was engaging with our stuff and realized that the people that were interested in our way of thinking of people and engagement and all this were not, the bigger engineering consultants or things like that, but actually the smaller entrepreneurial businesses.
Mhm.
So, we took these inputs that came somewhat unexpectedly and had to be kind of nimble and flexible. So that's all like a long-winded way of saying, I think do a formal strategy program for your business, right?
Yeah.
But don't do it once a year, right? You know, at the minimum, revisit it on a like quarterly basis, if not more. Like, does this actually make sense still? Like, what are the assumptions I made here? Are
Right.
they holding true, right? And it's more of like an ongoing back of your mind process rather than a tick box type thing. Does that
Right.
answer your question?
Oh, it absolutely does. Yeah, definitely. And you're right on that. I mean, sometimes well, I think when we were collaborating on Anta's Miro platform, I think it was, when
Hmm.
uh, we were talking about scenario planning, and I wrote an article on LinkedIn about scenario planning and kind of developing different scenarios.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, sometimes, I mean, sometimes you are able to capture those scenarios that could potentially happen, but sometimes it's really, really something that is beyond your imagination, like this COVID-19.
Hmm.
Like you said, who knew it would happen, right? So, like an element that you must have as a part of your strategy, like you did, and that's how you're thriving right now, is that you need to be able to pivot quickly. You need to be able to adapt quickly. So, I mean, as long as this is an element of your strategy, that's further. There's nothing like it. So yeah, that really is on point.
Yeah. And
So yeah,
sorry.
please go ahead.
I was going to say, we have this idea of, so I love the scenario planning piece because it's telling a story, right? You're almost like telling a story about the future and how you fit into it.
Yeah.
And out of that, you're going to come up with some ideas or some assumptions. And the question is like, okay, well, if this happens, I don't know, like election changes, right? A lot of companies are dependent on funding from the government. So if the government changes or if whatever regulations go up or things out of your control, how can I either ground the probability of that happening or immunize myself against it because I can't control it, but I can at least try and sterilize the effect it'll have on my business by bracing for it early on, right? So um, anyway, I love strategy. It's like this crazy whirlwind that it's probably the hardest thing as a consultant when you talk with clients and that we've done that, A, for me to learn, and B, to communicate, because there's no like right or wrong way of doing it exactly. I don't think
Yeah,
there's scenarios you can write. There's like assumption. There's like all these. You can buy $1,000,000 that'll tell you to do it a slightly different way, right?
right.
Kind of find a way that kind of seems to work for you and make sense to you.
Yeah, definitely. You're absolutely right. So you talked about Enta strategy. So out of the different organizations that Enta has been working with so far, did you oftentimes come across some companies, some organizations who really needed help with their strategy and they were not really aware of that?
Yeah, it's funny. We meet a lot of leadership or companies with different personalities, different pain points, but often, you know, what we end up doing them is like kind of the exact same thing. We'll do like a culture workshop where they help define their culture. Then we'll do this thing we call accountability mapping, where we map out like the different accountabilities and structures of their organization. And then we'll do a strategy program. So like we build on a foundation of, what is your vision and what are your values? And then like, what are all the hats everyone's wearing? And then, okay, now we've got some basis to talk about the future and planning for that. And, we call it shiny thing syndrome, right? Um, One of the greatest gifts of an entrepreneur is the ability to see opportunity and get excited and make it happen, right? But sometimes that's also your greatest weakness because stick to your guns and follow through, don't change, and then don't change because you end up with this like whiplash effect for your team behind you who can't keep up with, what
Right.
ideas you're having or what you're doing. So we see like that type where it's this like whipping effect, and then we also see other type where it's more like slow and steady. We'll keep doing things the way we've always done them. And we see that a lot with companies that have been, very successful the last, say, 30 years and then are going through like a leadership change, right? And those ones are often the new leadership wants to embrace things like social media or new partnerships or things of that nature. So yeah, it's always one of the biggest things. So like just kind of calm the storm and provide clarity, right?
Right, right. So you just mentioned a little something about culture. So I I don't know how to put that. I mean, on paper or in theory, the idea might seem like really simple. I mean, culture should align with the strategy, right? But it's not always the case. I mean, you will
Hmm.
come across many different organizations where the two are not really aligned. Culture points in another direction where the strategy, which is on paper in form of value statements or mission statements, that is pointing to something different. So, how do you think? What is the best way to align the two?
Well, the best way I ever heard this explained was like your vision, which is like part of the culture, should be so clear that if I were to phone any of your employees at 5 o'clock in the morning and wake them up and be like, "Quick, tell me your vision," and they should be like all groggy and be like, "Oh, it's to be the number one." Well, they should nail it, right? How many people could say that, right? Like, "Oh, I don't know, it's on that card I have," right? Um, but how do you align the two? I find the first thing we do is ask them, right? A lot of companies, for example, will have their values and maybe they even have it on the wall or on their website, whatever, but like, what do they do with it? So, like, for example, we have a program where we ask the individuals to go through a process where they define their own personal values.
Right.
And that's an ongoing process. Anyone who's ever done that knows that that takes time. But like your first crack at it, at least you kind of pick out, let's say, three or four or five. And then we say, okay, well, what do you think the corporation's values are? And then, they'll pick from the same list. And then we compare them. We take some results of like um, all the employees, and we kind of take their values that they picked and then categorize them with other synonyms. And then we compare that to what they said they think the corporate values are. And then we kind of do a little graph because we're engineers. We like that. And you can kind of see where the alignment is. You're like, okay, everybody, a lot of people said teamwork, or at least synonyms that related to teamwork. That also showed up in what they think the company is. So you get a sense of like, what is the real state? I know you have like what's on your website or on your wall or whatever, but like, what is the actual state of things, right? Because you say these things like values of who you are and what you do, but then when times are good, it's easy, right? Everyone's making money,
Yeah.
everything's are great. And then when times are tough,
Yeah.
or you've got a client, maybe your best paying client that is doing something shady that you don't like,
Mhm.
what do? Your values say you shouldn't work for them,
Right.
right? It's a tough decision. So if you don't behave in the way that reflects those values on the wall, people will see that and they'll know that it's bullshit, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Um, so again, a long way to say that that's the first thing we do is try and get the personal values and then what the actual perceived values of the company are and create an alignment and an excitement because, you know, how many times have you been asked by a company if what do you think, right? It rarely happens. Usually you just been told what to do and carry on, right? So
That's
it's a huge opportunity to create trust in this process.
That's right. That's right. So, if you after this exercise of identifying what the values are, like the organization's values
Mhm.
and the values of the individuals, like if you find any misalignment, how do you kind of ensure? Do you collaborate with the executive leadership? How do you ensure that this alignment is attained at least after some time?
Hmm. Well, I mean, the first thing in all this is the leadership has to be willing to commit or change to an ideal, right?
Right.
So if you're not in alignment, if it's not like, oh, hey, look, we found as a team, we agreed that these are our, then at least you can agree on where you'd like to be. Like, okay, guys, like here's how we've been operating. This is where we'd like to get to. At least that is a step in the right direction, right?
Right.
And if leadership can commit to that, and the only way that doesn't fall short is if the leader gets super vulnerable, and very few people are willing to do that, especially if they've climbed the corporate ladder and kind of fought their way to get there. So I could say it can be done, like a culture shift like that,
Right.
but it is not easy, and it's you know a leader really needs to get down and get vulnerable, and I think gratitude is the biggest key to it, right? As a leader yourself, you have to recognize that, yeah, some of your failings
Mhm.
caused this or resulted in this,
Yeah.
and but at the same time, you're trying your best. So first, you have to be grateful to yourself that, hey, you did your best, right? And then you got to be grateful for your team that they showed up and they told you the truth and they were candid, and you
Mhm.
got to thank them for that, and we're gonna change together. I
Yeah.
need help doing that. Will you be willing to help me? You know, and then teams grateful to each other. Like it sounds very arm wavy, but this is the human emotion
Mhm.
stuff, right? Um, and this is where we would collaborate with business coaches, for example, right? We're not certified coaches, but as you can see from the process I just described, we find ourselves often very quickly in these like coaching conversations.
Mhm.
And, by nature of being management consultants, as you know, Sean, we're good listeners. That's part of our skill set, right? Um, but yes, I would bring in times of need, like a trained coach that specializes in either team or leadership or whatever. So we work very closely with those types of people in these kind of culture shift, tricky situations.
Right, right. Oh, no, that definitely makes perfect sense. Um, yeah, I was just curious, like, there are different ways to approach strategy, right? So an organization might view strategy as like from the lens of experience, like, which is more built up on the past events, how the organization experienced different things in the past. or it could be design, like it would be more analytical in nature, more top down, like set by the executive leadership, which is just the executive leadership sets the tone, and
Hmm.
everybody needs to follow. So, do you think there's a golden rule? There's a best way to how to approach or view strategy?
Uh, I don't know. I think I shy away of saying like golden rule or best way, right?
Mm,
Because, there's a process for which you explore strategy, and then there's also the second part, which is, as you talked about, implementing it.
right.
So, the approach we see most often is the leadership does this, and then they tell everyone this is happening.
Right.
Um, I think more powerful is top down and bottom up. Like, I'm not going to say you don't need that top down. Like, your leadership is there for a reason because they have the skills and the knowledge and the experience to guide the ship, right?
Mm,
But at the same time, your employees are the ones doing or most closely connected to the actual work and work product, whatever that is, right? So I think the trick is to very clearly define a process in which you can engage the bottom up. You can say top down,
right.
here's what we're trying to do, here's where we're
Yeah.
trying to do it. But you can say, if anyone has any suggestions, here's the process in which you can suggest an idea or ask a question. And here's how we will like evaluate it. And we will always give you an answer, even if the answer is no.
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, we'll explain it to you. No,
Yeah.
because we don't have the budget for you right now, but maybe next year. No, because here's some more information that you didn't know. We're all, that's a cool idea, but we're also working on this thing over here. So now that doesn't make sense or whatever, right?
Mhm.
So create a way for people to have a voice and tell you if the strategy is working or not, because it's the symptoms will show up on the floor long before you see it on the financial reports, right?
That's right. That's right.
So, um, yeah, that's that. The other tricky part of that is, this, if I go and I ask, if I'm the leader of a company and I say, hey, I want everyone's opinion, everyone's like, well, I don't want to give my opinion to the boss, right? And then one guy puts up their hand and gives it to you.
Mhm.
You better respond, right? Everyone's going to watch the first few suggestions that are made and see what happens. Everyone's going to be watching. And if you respond quickly, if you take them seriously, then you're going to start seeing a shift in like, oh, okay, like I've got ideas too, right? Like it's going to catch like wildfire. But
That's right.
yeah, it's a tremendous opportunity to gain trust, but it's also a tremendous opportunity to lose it quickly. So
Yeah.
don't dabble would
Mhm.
be, my
Yeah.
advice.
No, definitely that makes perfect sense. Personally, if one would ask me, I'm personally in favor of like a hybrid approach too. Like you have as a top as an executive leader, it's your responsibility to set the tone for the culture, for the strategy, for the vision where you want to head towards. But that has to be that analytics behind that decision or that vision has to be based on what kind of information you are getting from the bottom, right, and across the board. So me too, I'm in favor of a hybrid approach, which would work in most situations, but in certain situations that might depend. But you're absolutely right. There's not just one best way. It
Mhm.
could be bottom up and top down, both. So finally, at the end, my final question would be, what advice do you have for small businesses and medium businesses like mom and pop hardware stores or a family-owned logistics company or a small manufacturer or something like that? What advice would you have? How should they approach strategy and how should they avoid any pitfalls that are like more strategic in nature?
Um, Honestly, I think this idea of strategy even the word is intimidating, right? If I state, oh, you need to be strategic, there's like this pressure you feel right away to make like a clever decision, right? Um, some people have this like creative gift to see the future as it could be, right? And that's their strength, and that's awesome. Not everybody does, and that's fine. We all have our strengths. Other people are wicked awesome at executing and getting things done, right? So I guess my advice would be to understand your strengths. Like, where do you like to play? Do you like to dream about the future? Do you like reading books about, do you like hearing about businesses and what they're doing and thinking about how they apply to you? Or do you just like kind of executing and getting it done and checking the boxes and making sure that everything's perfect? Um, Whatever your strength is, align yourself with people that have strengths that complement you. Don't try and do it yourself. I think sometimes an entrepreneur's biggest downfall is being afraid to ask for help. It's this pressure or this idea that you have to do everything yourself.
Right.
So maybe that's a partner, maybe that's a consultant, maybe it's just calling someone up and asking for free advice, which I know you do that, Kashan, and I do that. Like anybody that helps other people for a living would gladly um, share some ideas with you. So yeah, I think that would be my biggest advice, right? Like don't
Yeah.
get too worked up about what you should do. Do what you're good at, and then find a partner to complement that.
No, definitely a very valuable advice, and you're right. Sometimes people just start to or try to do everything by themselves, and kind of they get really overwhelmed by a lot that is going on because business is definitely it's not easy. It's complicated, and the bigger the scope of your work or your organization, I mean, the more complicated it becomes.
Mhm.
So yeah, asking for help and having someone on board who specializes in that particular skill set that is relevant in that situation, that is definitely the right way to go. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think that is all what I have on my mind right now, and yeah, I think that's about it. So thank you so very much for joining us today, Adam. And hopefully we will bug you sometime again in future. But for today, yeah, that was it. And thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts. And I'm sure the viewers who are watching this discussion, they will be able to draw a lot of great value and great insights from what you had to share with us today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's lots of fun. And for anybody watching, if you joined this, you should check out where we did the reverse, where I interviewed Kashan. It's even better. So anyway, take care. Thanks so much, Kashan.
Yeah, thank you so very much for joining us. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for watching. I'm sure you've enjoyed the interview. Our next discussion will be on the topic of data and the importance of data analytics for any business. Till then, take care.